Parkinson's is a movement disorder that we've mentioned before, but we're going to talk formally about now. But before we do this, please go and watch this video. Link is in the description. Of Michael J. Fox, who's an actor from when I was a kid, who came down with Parkinson's. And he got it pretty early and he got it pretty severe. Now in this video you'll see two clips, one before he got sick and one after. In the first clip, ignore what he's talking about. It's acting mumbo jumbo that doesn't make sense to me, but whatever he's talking about, note how smooth he is, how fluent he is, how his movements are so rhythmic, not rhythmic actually, so controlled and smooth. Then note how things change in the Oprah interview. Okay, go watch that and come back. Alright, now I'm assuming that you watched that video. What you saw was a very sick person. Now, what's happening here? Well, we're having death of neurons in the substantia nigra. These neurons produce dopamine and send dopamine to the basal ganglia. This is the nigrostriatal system. The substantia nigra makes dopamine, sends it over to the basal ganglia, which are aka striatum. So what's happening? Well, we don't know the cause in every case. The damage is always the substantia nigra, but what is it that's leading to the damage? One known cause is a mutation of Parkin. This is a gene that helps us unwind and get rid of misfolded proteins. Well, when you have this mutation, this disrupts your ability to clean up faulty proteins. If you can't clean these guys up, we've talked about faulty proteins before and we'll talk about them again. They build up and they cause cellular injury. Now, what could bring on these mutations? You could be born with it, but you might also imagine that mutations can be caused by oxidative stress and from exposure to toxins. Parkinson's, one of the interesting things is most conditions seem to have been around forever, for a long time at least. Parkinson's seems to be relatively new. Parkinson's seems to only have shown up with industrialization, which leads people to suspect that there might be a link. In addition, amongst the groups most affected are agricultural workers who are exposed to pesticides, herbicides, fungicides at very high levels. Now, while there aren't specific chemicals that have been linked, my dumb guy hypothesis is that it's probably of course it's a gene-environment interaction, but there might be something generic about just a dosage effect of how much pesticide, how much toxin are you getting into your body. Now, before I get into this slide, treatment for Parkinson's, it's all about medications. And these are all dopaminergic drugs, trying to maximize the remaining neurons in the substantia nigra to make them work extra hard to compensate for all the dead neurons. But medications are fraught with side effects. As we've talked about, dopamine drugs are dumb. drugs. They're very generalized in their effect, so you get lots of unwanted side effects here. Also, tolerance is inevitable, and you pair side effects with tolerance, and you end up in a point where the side effects are absolutely prohibitive, and you can't continue these meds. As such, there are lots of alternative experimental kinds of treatments uh, that have been attempted. This is gene replacement therapy, where what they did is they went to the subthalamic nucleus and transformed the working of these neurons such that they began to produce GABA instead of glutamate. So what does that do? Let's look at this circuit here. This is a circuit that controls movement. What I want to focus your attention on is this part right here, especially this part. What you see is that the globus pallidus, part of the basal ganglia, is tonically inhibiting the thalamus, effectively preventing movements. Now, normally, the subthalamic nucleus excites the pallidus, which makes it inhibit the thalamus even more. Red arrows are inhibitory, black arrows are excitatory. So, normally, the subthalamic nucleus excites the globus pallidus, which inhibits your thalamus, and you're frozen. Now, let's say you need to move. You get dopamine release, and that releases the thalamus from inhibition and allows you to move. What they did in this gene replacement, again, is they transformed this black arrow into a red arrow. They made it inhibitory. So now the subthalamic nucleus is inhibiting the globus pallidus, releasing the thalamus from inhibition. Right? If we're going to reduce this inhibition, the thalamus can now more easily stimulate movement. But this is kind of alarming because gene replacement through viral vectors, it's kind of unpredictable. But we do know experimentally it does work. Other treatments that have been tried are surgical ablation targeting parts of this circuit. A common target is to go in and injure the globus pallidus internal, which will reduce this inhibition. But this is surgically induced brain damage. Other options are deep brain stimulations, where surgeons will implant electrodes in different parts of the circuit and try to cause changes in the workings of the circuit. But we're optimistic that stem cells will eventually be the long-term, maybe hopefully permanent cure for Parkinson's. Stem cells, also known as pluripotent or omnipotent cells. These are cells that can differentiate into a neuron or a skin cell or a bone cell or a muscle cell. These are even more generic cells that can become any cell of the body. But we're mostly at this point right now. Stem cells have been controversial for as long as I can remember, because the early stem cell studies were done with stem cells derived from aborted fetuses. That caused a huge uproar, and the scientific community went back to the lab, and nowadays we don't need fetal stem cells. We can get stem cells from adults. They revert adult cells to pluripotent state and then back forward into one of the cells of the body. I'm hopeful that Parkinson's will benefit from stem cell implants into the substantia nigra. The reason I'm hopeful is it's a small area and it's one kind of cell that we're trying to repair. Imagine replacing your fingertip, just your fingertip. Let's say it gets cut off and you want to replace the fingertip. This is an astronomically difficult task because you have skin, bone, muscle, nerve cells, nail, etc., 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 all sorts of cells in very precise orientation. Well, you can be a lot more sloppy, at least to get things going in substantia nigra dopamine cells. We'll see. I'm hopeful, but you're continually disappointed if you get too optimistic. Now, Parkinson's is a condition where this circuit is in the off mode, right? Huntington's disease, which is next, is a situation where the same circuit is stuck in the on mode. But that's just a part of it. So Huntington's is associated with constant movement and brain degeneration. One of the most interesting things about Huntington's is that it's a dominant gene disorder. This is extremely unusual for brain diseases because they tend to be very complex. But Huntington's, if you have big H is bad, little h is good. In order for you to have Huntington's, that means you got the mutated copy from one of your parents. If you have this, you will get Huntington's, and you will die from Huntington's. About 2 to 5 years after onset, people usually die. Now, if we just do some simple Mendelian genetics, if one of your parents has Huntington, what are your chances of having it? Well, let's do the possible outcomes of your parents mating. You could get this from one parent and this from the other. You have Huntington's. You could get this from one parent and this from the other. Again, you have Huntington. But if you get this and this, you're okay. If you get this and this, you're okay. So if one parent has it, 50% chance, right? All right, cool. What about if both parents have it, which is astronomically unlikely, but I'm not going to do this for you. You do it. You work it out. What are the chances of you having Huntington if both your parents have it? Watch this video and you will see some patients and you will see a woman, young lady who is positive for the Huntington mutation. It hasn't kicked in yet because Huntington usually kicks in around 45 to 55 years old. There's no real treatment. In 2019, the first treatment for Huntington was approved, but it has very limited benefit. Very, very limited benefit.